It is a whole different ballgame when you're sitting in this chair.
You gotta see how relaxed Scott is, though. He's leaning back in the chair. He's breathing.
Hey, blood pressure is, it's great. It's stable.
Okay, where are we on, do we want to keep moving? Do we want to have a break? Can we keep moving? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering if we couldn't go back to, we had a recess yesterday where we didn't finish yesterday's. And it seems to me like we should go back to 15E. We never got to 15E, and then follow it up from there.
Actually, at the beginning of the commission meeting, we talked about the agenda and what we wanted to do was get through these action items and then go ahead and do all of the informational items afterwards. So anyway, we're going to get to them.
Okay.
Okay. Next up is the biennial upland game release plan for fiscal year 2012 and fiscal year 2013. Wildlife Staff Specialist Shawn Espinoza, action item. The Commission will review and be asked to approve the Department's proposed biennial upland game release plan for fiscal years 2012 and 2013. Shawn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Shawn Espinoza, Nevada Department of Wildlife. I'm the upland game staff specialist for the department. You should have that in your support material. As you know, by Commission Policy 22, we are to develop a 2-year biennial release plan for the Commission to be approved. Just to briefly summarize, kind of expedite things here a little bit. What we have involved in that particular release plan is statewide California quail, kind of a blanket release statement on California quail. We have a pretty successful program of dealing with California quail in the Reno, Carson area that are creating problems during the wintertime and often move California quail to different areas throughout northwestern Nevada, and that's been a pretty successful program actually. Mountain quail, even though they're somewhat difficult to come by, we've had success in the past with mountain quail in various areas of the state. We have 5 introductions and 1 augmentation plan. 4 of those introductions would occur in Lincoln County, Nevada. 1 introduction in White Pine County, and then an augmentation in Story County. Rio Grande turkey, we have 5 introductions planned with 1 augmentation. 4 introductions would take place in Lincoln County, 1 in Lander, and then 1 augmentation taking place in Elko County. We have no Miriam's turkey planned releases for the next biennium. Ruffed grouse is a species that we continue to be pretty excited about, even though that it's been another species that's difficult to get our hands on, but we certainly have adequate suitable habitat and some success stories to demonstrate there. We have 3 introductions planned and 3 augmentations. And then another project that we have is Columbian sharp-tailed grouse introductions into Elko County. This has been a long, ongoing project, but we certainly feel that it's worthy of the effort given the habitat conditions that we've seen improve over the years in the bull runs and Independence Range. And this would be a long-term effort, 5-year effort with approximately 50 to 75 birds translocated to the area each year for a total of 200 to 250 birds over a 5-year period. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have about those specific proposed actions.
I actually have a general question. And, I know of some habitat that's it's actually in a wilderness area, but it's right on the edge, and so it's still accessible. It's Are there any limitations on doing any kind of transplants of turkeys, for instance, into wilderness areas? Does that somehow conflict with what's wilderness and it's, you know, pristine but, you know, natural? You know, if there's never been turkeys there before. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Chairman Macbeth. We do face difficulties there. Oftentimes, we're not allowed to release in a wilderness study area or a wilderness area for species that are non-native. Even we face problems with species that may be endemic, so-called endemic to the United States, that may not be in a specific area previously. Rough crops, we faced that issue before, in the pine forest specifically. So that either forces us to either no longer consider that particular release or release on private land, which has been done in the past too.
So if they're released on private land, just happen to wander into the wilderness, and there's nothing that can happen on that. Thank you. Commissioner Drew.
Just a quick comment, Sean. I thought, I read through the plan, I thought it looked real good. Just to compliment you and your staff for putting that together. And I think that's evident by the support from all the cabs who reported back to us.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional commission comment? Okay, I guess I'll turn this over to the public. Any cab or public comment?
I'm Floyd Rathbun. I live here in Fallon, and so I'm only moderately prepared for you today. First question is we skipped from number 22 to 25. I was really hoping you're going to discuss 23, 24, and 25 in order. Is something, is that going to come up later? I was asked to come in.
Yeah, we've made a number of changes to the agenda. I can tell you that 23A we're going to be discussing. Actually, we're going to do the next agenda item after this is going to be the biennial big game release plan, which is 26. We're then going to go back up and pick up 23A, and 2024 has been stricken, and then we're going to go to the informational items from the first day that we missed.
And that explains why Cliff Garner came and left. He's no longer on the agenda.
Yes, we are going to have him come back. He didn't distribute any materials. No materials were distributed, and so the commission made the decision, and it's going to be consistent on all agenda items from here on out. Is that the rule of the day is going to be that it's not going to get on the agenda unless backup materials are supplied. So it goes out to the cabs. The cabs can come back with comment, and the public can come back with comment. That's going to be the new way that we do business. And so anyway, we did invite him back for September, so he's going to have the opportunity to come back if he so chooses, if he supplies us with all the materials, and then we'll let him go ahead and have his discussion.
I hope he does. His preparation on history in the States is substantial. It's really dependable.
Yeah, and
anyway,
for that very reason, it's substantial. It warrants letting everybody else have an opportunity to look at it, and then they can comment, and we can have a much more meaningful discussion instead of just a one-sided discussion. We'll actually have some debate on it, and it'll be fair, you know, a much fairer process for everybody. And so we're not going to deny them an opportunity to come forth, but we're going to let everybody, you know, have a shot at it as well.
Thank you. The reason I haven't been here today is one branch that I work for is the FFiissccaall Corporation in Lyon County. And when the ranch discovered that sage grouse and bighorn sheep were both on the agenda, they asked me, they couldn't make it today, and they asked me to come and make some comments on their behalf. I brought a.
Is this on the? Okay, the agenda item we're on is on the.
On the transplant.
Right.
What the ranch received this past week is a copy of the transplant plan, a copy of the bighorn sheep policy plan, then this agenda items that relate to both of those. So it's there. That's why I was wondering about these other two items, because they're all three of them had some comments. If I could, I'll just tell you what those comments are real quick.
Well, limit your comments solely to the upland biennial release plan, because that's the agenda item we're on right now. And then when we get to the other ones, you'll have to come back up and you can have comment on those.
Well, in that case, I didn't understand. I thought
Okay.
all the transplant stuff was being discussed.
No, this is just upland game bird release plan. We're gonna get to the big.
I apologize for
Okay.
getting that out of order.
Next one up is the big game plan, release plan.
If you like, then I'll wait until I have.
Okay, yes, please, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public or CAP comment? Okay, bring it back to commission. Any commission comment? Commissioner Schrum.
Mr. Chairman, clarify this for me. So if someone wants to get on the agenda and they simply have an informational item, okay, it's something they've done research on, all right, they must go ahead and submit it to the commission, and that in turn is submitted to all the cabs for review. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there a statute that demands this, or is this just a new program? Because it seems to me, if you're coming forth with information item like I had you this morning, which has mine with I have in December, which I gave you, has to deal with just an update on BLM closures in Clark County, and that covers the Gold Butte and things of that nature. It's simply informational. There's no action on it, all right? And so therefore, people in Washoe County might not even be concerned with just informational for them. I don't see why we're going to make it so much more difficult. Like Mr. Gardner came and he had an informational thing, and he was forced, he lives where the Rubies, makes a trip all the way over here. It just seems to me we're making it more difficult for the people who have information to us to be an asset to us. And this is just my opinion. But I can't see the value now. If there's something in the regs that says we must do this, fine, but if it's just something that has come up here in a moment, I think what we're doing is we're hindering people rather than helping them.
Commissioner Schrum, my response to that is very simple and direct. The days of us doing anything that is not going to involve the cabs and not going to get us full input from all sources, they're over. And we're not going to do anything that is just the bare minimum to avoid getting public input. And so, this is part of the change that occurred on July 1. And so the way this commission is going to work from here on out is that anybody who wants to come forth with something is certainly welcome to do that. We are going to also be, we have a lot of things to do, and we have a lot of agenda items. And I'm not guaranteeing that if a commissioner comes forth with an agenda item that we're going to necessarily get it on the particular meeting they want to, but we're going to do everything we can. But the rule of the day from here on out is that if we're going to have an agenda item, we're going to have backup information. That backup information has to be timely, and it has to go out to the cabs so they can have a meaningful discussion, vote, and come back to this commission and comply with their statutory obligations to give this commission input. That's how it's going to work.
I'm sorry, but that didn't answer my question. I said, is there...
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to call for a point of order.
Go ahead, Commissioner McNinch.
We don't currently have an agenda item to cover this particular item, and I think we need to get back to the business of the commission, and we can put that perhaps as a future agenda item, discuss that process.
Okay, noted.
Mr. Chairman, I still would like to know, is there a statute that says we have to do this? Or is this just the chairman's policy?
This is the prerogative of the chairman. It's also backed up by the wishes of the public.
Pardon me?
It's backed up by the wishes of the public.
When did the public make this?
The public made it very clear over the last 3 years.
Is there anything in writing about this?
Commissioner Schrum, we're going to move on. Any further comment on the release plan? That's what I'm asking. Any further comment on the release plan from the commissioners? Being none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the upland game release plan for state fiscal year 2012-2013 as presented by the Nevada Department of Wildlife.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the plan as presented. Any further discussion by the commission? Seeing none, go ahead and vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye and raise your hand. Aye. All opposed? Opposition 8-0. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on to the biennial big game release plan for fiscal year 2012 and fiscal year 2013. Wildlife staff specialist Mike Cox. The commission will review and be asked to approve the department's proposed biennial big game release plan for fiscal years 2012 and 2013. Mike.
Good morning, everyone. Mike Cox, big game staff, biologist for Nevada Department of Wildlife, here to introduce and review the proposed big game release plan for the next 2 fiscal years. That'll run through June 2013. Everyone has the proposed plan. We'll skip over the last 2 years' accomplishments, although they are listed on that page 1. Starting with desert bighorn sheep, give a little bit of information, but certainly open it up for questions, and I'm not sure where all the questions will come from, so I don't want to take much time. The Virginia Range, it's a reintroduction along the Truckee River on the north side. It does involve primarily private land. Truckee River Industrial, the TRI Corporation is in control of that land. We've had an extensive dialogue with them. Carl Lackey, our field biologist, has been meeting with them several times over the last 2-3 years, and developed a plan of his own. It provides a lot more detail than I'll give today, but I can certainly, if you've got questions, dig into that. We have a cooperative agreement with the TRI to allow for that reintroduction. The next one is the Excelsior Mountains. We've got a good population there, but it's a large, large mountain. And we've been wanting to extend the distribution of the sheep there. And with help from sportsmen, we've been building some water developments to try to extend some of that habitat that's in really good shape in terms of forage. We're going to continue to build a few more water developments, but we certainly are ready to put in a complement this year, and then with a few more water developments, probably another complement in the following fiscal. The East Range, mountain range just south of I-80 between the Humboldt Range and the Sonomas. It's kind of the northern extension of the Stillwaters. We have a small population that we've established since the 90s on the Root Spring, north Granite Mountain, north of McKinney Pass. This proposal is to establish a herd on the north end, in the Inskip, Willow Canyon areas. And this is one, and it'll come up again, where we have been looking at for some time our distribution of bighorn sheep in relation to domestic sheep permits. And we feel that we've got enough distance to make a reasonable estimate that we'll have success without Domestic Wild Sheep Association. But it would be good at a later date to give you a more full, complete review and presentation on our efforts with the Land Management Agency and the wool growers, and discussions with all the other western states in terms of wild sheep, domestic sheep management. Quite an extensive information database there that, safe to say that we've had a lot of challenges and risks over the years, but with more sheep than anyone in the West, we've had a lot of success, and we have taken some calculated risks in the past, and most of those have paid off, and both for the public and our sportsmen. So we are very cognizant of some of these situations where we have potential movement from both domestics and wild sheep, particularly the East Range, and really for all of our releases anymore. If we are releasing rams, all those rams are going to have some sort of a collar on them so we can track them. It's probably one of the biggest pieces of information that all of us throughout the West have found is wandering young rams are potentially the most vulnerable, or the age and gender of bighorn sheep populations that might get the entire herd in trouble. So we're going to really try harder to track their movements and try to be on top of any situation where they may get into. The other four, the South Pyrox, just east of Highway 93 in Lincoln County, the Meadow Valleys, and the Delamars, side by side, north and south of Cane Springs Wash, east of 93, and the Gold Buttes, east of the Virgin Arm, all provide an opportunity to augment and further expand the distribution of those current populations that are at various stages of numbers. They all have quite a bit of habitat that's still unoccupied. California bighorn sheep, the Santa Rosa range, we've got actually several releases that involve bits and pieces or edges of the Santa Rosa range. The first one is the Calico Mountain or Capitol Peak area. It's actually in an eastern foothill of the Santa Rosas, and we've always had an eye on trying to restore sheep there, and there would definitely be a connection with the Santa Rosas there. Martin Creek to the south, we augmented that about 5-6 years ago, actually about 4 or 5 years ago, and we have a small core there that we'd like to try to build up. The Jacksons, we were hoping to complete that augmentation 2 years ago, but ran into some issues, and so that's still on the docket, and still a lot of opportunity to expand that herd there. The Massacre Rim, kind of in the shadow of a lot of other mountains and rim country up in northern Washoe County, with the Sheldon and the Calico High Rock area, but it's got some good rim bighorn habitat. We've got a small herd that exists there, kind of on the western edge of the Sheldon, right on the edge of Unit 011 and 033, and got an opportunity to build that population up. The Santa Rosa Range in the south end, we're hoping to augment that. Particularly, the Peterman Creek would be probably the release site. Kind of involves that whole complex of Andorno, and buffalo and other adjacent canyons. Some great habitat, just low densities in there. Hayes Canyon. We still have some work to do in the Hayes Canyon. We had a die-off there in 2006, all-age die-off. We actually have not recently seen any live bighorn sheep, although we're assuming that there's probably a handful of survivors that at least in the last couple of years have seen those. And the one thing that we must do before we put sheep in there is to address potential risk that we have with a farm flock operator or an owner that lives at the base of the mountain. And we're hoping to begin discussions with him and the BLM and looking at, can we do, for example, a double fence around that small farm flock and reduce the risk of association and feel like we've eliminated that risk and be more comfortable before we were to release a complement back in the Hayes Canyon. It's great sheep habitat, and we'd like to try to restore that again. Rocky Mountain Bighorn. First two are kind of connected at the hip in many ways. We, as you all know, had a all-age die-off there, late 2009, 2010, and we've spent a lot of effort, especially Caleb McAdoo in the eastern region, in trying to monitor that die-off and trying to learn from that. We've also had a lot of discussion with our western counterparts through the Wild Sheep Working Group, the Western Association of Wild Sheep Working Group, and trying to see how we can move forward and try to reduce the future risk of another die-off. We kind of came at a die-off monitoring that we did in 09 and 10, really at a mindset of we're going to try to learn something, not necessarily that we could stop it. It was really too late, but could we learn something? And we're really back at that same concept here. Is a lot of the western states, as us, although they've had a lot more unfortunate experience with die-offs than we have, there's really no cookbook guideline for post-die-off management. People have tried everything from leaving them alone to augmenting them, supplementing their minerals and their feed, just everything. And then, at the end of the decade, there really hasn't been anything that they've found that works well. Although you probably remember states like Montana during those die-offs, they took a pretty hard line that they were going to cull as many sheep that had outward signs, clinical signs of pneumonia. They just have had too many experiences of never having recovery, of having those animals still in the population with those pathogens. And so they, we respected each other's decision on what to do. We didn't take that tack, and we ended up probably worse off than they did, going from about 350 down to about 30 collectively between the East Humboldts and Rubies. But so we've come up with a research project, if you will, where we're proposing to remove the remaining sheep in the East Humboldts and start from scratch. East Humboldt, I think, affords us the best opportunity with limited risks of restoring that herd. And I know it's going to be difficult to capture all of them, find them. It's not like they're in a pen. They're living on the mountain. They move up and down. But we've got quite a bit of history of their common winter ranges and their typical paths that they'll take back to winter range. And we feel pretty confident that we can capture them all. And those animals that we remove from there, we are proposing to release back into the rubies, where both populations, through our pathogen testing, pretty much harbor the same virulent pathogens. In fact, the mountain goats that are in both those populations also. And that is also another big component. There's other states and even Canadian provinces that have some Patrick mountain goat and bighorn herds. We have a hint that mountain goats could potentially be a pathogen reservoir that allowed for some of the pathogens to get into the bighorn sheep. But we came in Johnny-come-lately, way after the pathogens were well established in those animals, and probably we missed out on some things like viruses that may have been undetected. So it's a big question mark that a lot of the other western states have certainly chimed in with us, and they would love for us to be the kind of the guinea pig to learn. If you start with a fresh batch, if you will, of bighorn, knowing exactly the type of pathogens they harbor going in, and you know what the mountain goats have, can we learn what happens there? We know that there's a lot of close association with those animals during the summer, and that is a big concern of ours. Is mountain goats are non-native, but a tremendous resource. I don't see us wanting to sacrifice those for bighorn sheep, and so but we want to try to learn, and we feel that not only would we learn from this research project, but other states would. And again, most of those animals would be marked. We need to know if there's going to be any movement between the rubies and these tumbles. And really, from a research standpoint, we're trying to follow up with surviving animals that in some people's eyes seem to be superior because they have survived a real nasty all-age die-off event. But history has told us that their lamb recruitment has always been compromised because of the inability for those lambs to have a full immune system for a few months of their early lives between what they got from their mom in vitro and then what they're gaining on their own. And that's really what the other western states have found, is if you continue to have those survivors, whatever animal you put in, wherever it came from, you have that potential risk of those others getting that virulent pathogen that was involved in that die-off, depending on their past exposure to that or something similar. The goat chutes, we still have quite a bit of work to do there. Back in 2009, or maybe even earlier, there was some thoughts from one of the primary wool growers, Jeff Roach. Most of his operations are in Utah. He was looking to have a kind of livestock change from domestic sheep to cattle in a couple of the allotments along the east side of the goat chutes. And since then, our Eastern Region staff, especially Caleb McAdoo, has been working with the BLM and working with Jeff Roach and his staff in trying to get conversion from sheep to cattle. It's not the perfect scenario. We do have a couple permits that still exist on the south end of the mountain range, although they haven't been active for a while. So we're still moving forward with that. We still have quite a bit of NEPA work to do. So we're not quite sure if it's going to be potentially next year at the earliest, or maybe even 2 or 3 years down the road. We still have potential challenges from people like Western Watersheds. So that one, is still on the table until we take care of some of those things. Plus, we're looking to, I want to build a few water developments that we're working with the BLM for clearance. And then lastly, pronghorn antelope. We've been working with the BLM down in Lincoln County. They secured some SSppeecciiaalliisstt monies to build water developments in various valleys in Lincoln County. The funding, well, there was a contract that was let to finally build those guzzlers, knowing that neither the BLM or us had the time and the staff to do it with all the other maintenance work that we have. So we're hoping to see those guzzlers start to get put in this fall and throughout this winter and next year. And as soon as some of those guzzlers get put in the Delamars, Hamlin, South Spring Valley, we're looking to augment those herds. And then Northern Antelope Valley, which is the southern tip of the Ghost Chute Mountains, Ffoorr Hills, near the Utah line. Got an opportunity to augment a very small herd there. But again, we're looking and waiting for water developments to be built before that release will occur. Questions?
Commissioner Rob?
The Delamar Mountains on the Bighorn sheep, what's the current status on that mountain? I know it's a big mountain. I've been on 4 different guzzler projects down there. We've thrown sheep at it 3 times in the past. At least 3, I can think of.
Probably 5 times.
I missed a couple.
Yeah. I talked to Mike Scott quite a bit. I was on some of those guzzlers myself when I worked down in Las Vegas. And we've had wildlife services out there working with us to see what impacts the bobcats, the coyotes, and the mountain lions have had on the sheep. And we definitely have had our share of mortalities, no doubt about it. It is, bar none, the biggest single contiguous chunk of bighorn habitat in the state. We are estimating 400 square miles of bighorn habitat. It burned several times, the recent being 2005. Our surveys, aerial surveys, have been promising, but have been incomplete, and they certainly haven't been what we wanted. We're still picking up, 40, 50 sheep on survey, and as the summary states, we are seeing survival of some of the initial releases that were done, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But we marked a lot of the sheep in there, and we've had some mortalities, and we wish we and Wildlife Services would have been a little bit more successful in there, but tough mountain to do some things. And I know we've had some recent discussions with Wildlife Services, and there's been a little bit of a shift from using hounds to using more snares. But I think one of the things that we feel, and Mike Scott agrees, is it's such a big mountain range. You can miss 50 sheep so easy it's not even funny. So could there be, could we have 100, 120 on survey? Absolutely, but we're only picking up 50. One of the other things I wanted to add is we've been focused mostly in augmenting the western side of the Delamars over the last 3 or 4 releases that we've done, overlooking Highway 93. And Mike is really excited about more interior toward Boulder Canyon to the east, and feels that it's got some great stuff in it. It's got a lot of natural waters, and so The other thing I would say, knowing that we were likely not picking up all the sheep that currently exist in the Delmars, is we know we've had a ton of movement to the Meadow Valleys. And the Meadow Valleys have benefited from the sheep that were initially released in the Delmars. And the Meadow Valleys are doing pretty well. Another big chunk of contiguous sheep habitat. We've had some move to the north. We've had them move into the north end of the sheep range, across Maynard Spring area, Maynard Lake, and so we've had a lot of dispersal. Not sure if that's more common or less common compared to normal, but we've put a lot of collars on them, so we've learned more about their movements. If we, are short on sheep, we have other opportunities. We may choose other mountain ranges to put the sheep in first, but we still feel that there's an opportunity to establish a core herd of at least 200 sheep that I think once we get to that level, they're going to do a lot better. But and the other thing is, there's been a lot of other mountain ranges we don't normally pay attention to, and this one hasn't, there's a microscope on it for sure. So
I'm not disagreeing with it, I was just asking a question because it's been on here as long as I can remember.
400 square miles.
I've flown a lot of it, walked a lot of it, spent a lot of time. Alberta's listed as source stock for the Rocky Mountain. A few years back when we had mad cow going on, stuff like that, it didn't look like we were going to have the ability to go back to British Columbia or Alberta to bring sheep back in. That was basically pulled off the table. Now it's back on the table, and that's a possibility.
A possibility at this point. Yeah, we made some phone calls back 2 years ago. In fact, it was the summer of '09. I was just thinking ahead. Maybe I spoke with my counterpart, Jim Allen, with Alberta Fish and Wildlife. He was fully aware of the USDA closure of the border because of the BSE, the quote mad cow disease, for importing any live animals. So we brought it up at the Wild Sheep Working Group at WAFA, and it was something that all the western states and provinces felt that if there was interest from a few states, that maybe we can dive into it and see what the status is. So we, back in December of '09, Perry Wolf, our veterinarian, with a few other veterinarians, met during a conference in Minneapolis, spoke with a couple of the leads with the USDA import office out of Virginia, and got a positive feedback and response from them that right now, yes, our rules say that we can't, but we are willing to extend an offer for you to submit a proposal, one-time proposal to get approval to bring some sheep back into the United States. When I made the contact in '09, the state of Nebraska independently were looking for source populations, and they were getting a bunch of sheep from Montana, but Montana was licking their wounds. So they and us have been working together on that challenge of bringing the sheep in. There's a few other challenges. And so far, everything's positive. The assistant director there for that import office has kind of given us his list of dues to do to fulfill his needs before he would sign off, and so far we've met all those. So far it's looking positive. Alberta is willing to give up some of their sheep to both of us states, but we do have a few more challenges to do. And we also, at the same time, knowing that potentially could fall through, we identified a Colorado as a potential source stock for that research project on the East Humboldts. So.
Thank you. I'll try to stick with some questions here. One is on the Virginia range. Remember this came up last time. A commission asked about the letter that says here, landowners and adjacent permittees be sent out a letter resolving them of any liability. And it goes on. Now, did we ever see? I never saw a copy of that. I we'd asked about that before. Did it ever get shipped out? I didn't see it as part of the materials, just to see what we're talking about. And if that is that a legally binding document? Have they seen it? Was it gone over by the DAGs? It's one of those things.
Well, we've been kind of statewide working toward a strategy of maintaining sheep separation between domestic and wild sheep. And actually, while this Virginia range plan was being developed and discussions were occurring not only with TRI but with the permittee who has a domestic sheep permit on the north end, about 15 miles or so north. The Goshute Mountain Range efforts were moving forward. We actually developed you can call it whatever you want, a liability, release liability, hold harmless agreement, and I believe that we've come up with a document that is acceptable to our agency and to the Attorney General's office. And it just says, look, we're not going to make a big hoopla, we're not going to roast and toast you in the public eye, we're not going to point fingers. It's something that, if it happens, it happens in terms of a potential interaction or even a disease event. And with or without any information, we're going to hold the operator harmless.
The commission had asked to see a copy of that, and that was one of the reasons they got turned down us, is we hadn't seen a copy and were hoping to see, that was one of several reasons.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's before we start jumping out on a limb, and a lot of that one is specifically, and also I know that the other one, the one at the end of the Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep one, on the ghost shoot as well, and that the agreements there, we'd be voting on something dependent upon agreements that don't exist. I mean, really approving stuff that we don't even know what it is, and we don't have any copies of. We should really have that before we even vote on that. And also, you'd mentioned previously that there is a, this is back on the Virginia one, that there is an agreement with the TRI. Is that a legally binding agreement, or is this a handshake agreement? You just can't go over.
It's a cooperative agreement.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can't remember for the record. We can certainly provide you the letter that we sent, and you can have a look at it. DAG knew, reviewed it. It basically says the Department of Wildlife is going to hold harmless the operator, and we're making a commitment to them. As far as binding, that's just an agreement between us and the operator. But we can certainly provide you a copy of public record. I have to ask Suzanne. I thought we had sent it as a email to the commission. But
no, I mean I could give you 500 pages of more support material. It's just we just figured we're already giving you.
The nature of the TRI agreement, and that's a separate agreement from the other one. I can't change to separate question. I'm gathering that we'll get a copy. Should get a copy of that. Good. Now the TRI agreement. What is the nature of it? Is it a written document? Is it a what is the form of that agreement?
It's a cooperative agreement.
It's a written document, one-page deal, or is it a?
Yeah, it's not on a napkin. It's a. I mean, as far as I know, it's legally binding, but it just identifies what that party agrees to, what we agree to do. Just spells out some simple things. law enforcement, our ability to capture, transplant, access onto their properties, just things like that.
Okay, and the reason I'm kind of trying to get into that is I have not seen that document, is what I would be worried about from the sportsman's point of view, I think, would be we make an agreement with them, we plant the sheep, management changes, the company sells out and it's new people, whatever happens. Now we have no access to that area. They've got, it's 100,000 acres, plus they've got a huge amount of the access to other land in there. Suddenly that gets cut off. If this agreement covers that, that can't happen. I mean, what happens if they sell out?
It is a good point. Then all bets are off. We'd have to go back into discussions with the new owner. And within the agreement, we certainly speak to hunting and hunter access, but it was never spelled out 100% of once we get to the point of having hunting season, what will we do in terms of hunter access? What will the TRI do for hunter access? For example, I know we've got several mountain ranges, in particular Virginia mountains, that the ranch, the fish spring, the ranch on the east side of the range has been gracious to hunters to allow access, but we don't have an agreement for access. So, that's a wild card.
And hopefully the last portion of my actual questions on the subject would be a different one, as we're talking about the East Humboldt, Ruby Mountains. Be a couple parts on that. One is the pathogen, if in the absence of sheep in the East Humboldt range, if you do manage to take them out, can it live in any other species that are in the East Humboldt range, except the mountain goats, and they do go into their sun. So what is our risk, and can it live in other, anything else that will allow it to reoccur?
Yeah, and that's why I brought up the mountain goats can be a reservoir for the pathogens. In fact, there was, like for example, the mycoplasma, a very, very similar bug, if not the exact same bug, that the mountain goats in the East Humboldts had as the big sheep that we're sampling in the East Humboldts.
And does it live in anything else besides the living animals? I mean, can it live for quite a while outside of the animals? Should the land be rested for a length of time? I was understanding that that's not true, but I figured the question should be asked.
Everything that we know about is it has to live within some post. I mean, I'm not saying that you wouldn't have a water trough at 72 degrees or 75 degrees or 98 degrees on a hot summer day for 10 seconds that it could survive, and you happen to have wild sheep come in right after some other animal was there, but it typically has to live within those.
Okay, but you haven't identified that you need to rest the area for 2 years in order to make sure that it doesn't get retransmitted to another animal. There's nothing like that that's come out in the literature.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting. A lot of states have this, we'll let it cool off.
Yeah.
That's a great scientific term. What is cool off? And I've approached all my Western counterparts. And really it came down to is let the survivors die. That's really, when you asked the various states how they dealt with post-management, the cool-off period is let the survivors die or kill them off during that period. That's really, from what I can gather, the wait and see, the waiting period. But there's nothing in the environment that's going to be any more of a risk than if you waited 10 years.
You can see where I'm coming from on these items. I'm just wondering if it's in the opinion of the department, if it's too soon for a variety of items to go ahead and just bring this back in there, because I'm trying to figure out what has changed in the mountain range that's going to tell us that they've got a better chance of survival than they did the first time the die-off, second time the die-off, and we're talking about numbers and how much money it's cost, and then they've died off. And, you know, if nothing has changed, I mean, I know we were told at previous meetings that there would be more information, and before transplants ever took place, we'd hear a lot more about the biology and maybe what could be done to prevent a die-off, and I'm still searching for that.
Well, we learned about as much as we can, and I think the big thing we learned was mountain goats are a potential reservoir, and we still have the domestic livestock potential interaction. We had some interesting virus titers that we picked up in the sheep, and they can be found both in domestic sheep and cattle. And I think we realized that we didn't learn enough. And so the one thing that I know that and the timing is we can probably get sheep from some other state. Will we be able to get sheep from Alberta after this year? You know, I hope so. I hope that we can, this USDA importation restriction is lifted long term. And I know there's sportsmen out there that are kicking me in the heel and the head about, you know, what source stock you should use for the East Humboldts, and obviously both East Humboldts and Ruby's origin of those sheep was the Cattleman mine in Alberta, and there was a lot of excitement while those sheep were there, and I was trying to see if that was still an option, but we certainly can you know, wait if we had to, and get sheep from somewhere else, or maybe even get sheep from somewhere else this year. Another point of concern that's been brought up by a few people is, you know, how successful can we be? And I know Caleb's in the back of the room, and maybe have him speak to this, is how successful can we be with 2 or 3 attempts to remove all the survivors from these tumbles? And do you wait and say, well, maybe we missed a couple, let's give it a year. So that certainly is something that's out there. I know the Eastern Region is confident that they can do it. We would, you know, hire the local helicopter crew along with our contracted net gun crew to do multiple searches. But so those, I mean, all of our eyes are wide open on this. I mean, it has risks. I think the upside is maybe we can put things to rest, because the problem with all the western states, they never really are prepared for a die-off. They're busy running around just like us, trying to deal with all of our other brush fires. And when they occur, they're 40, 50, 60% down the road. And whatever had happened, wherever it came from, the pathogens, we don't know, and you can't turn the clock back. And in this case, we can start fresh and have a sheep herd that we transplant that is, we're all knowing about what pathogens are in it, and we can track it and maybe try to at least isolate whether mountain goat, bighorn is a good or bad thing.
Okay,
Did you want to
Caleb, yeah, let's go ahead and listen to Caleb.
For the record, Caleb McAdoo, Department of Wildlife. First, I'd like to commend Commissioner Rain and other members of the board for the specific questions regarding these releases. Bighorn sheep releases in the state of Nevada are something that the Department of Wildlife takes extremely seriously. Never have they been something that we would call willy-nilly or without extreme hard work and forethought, and looking into the future. So I commend you guys on really looking at this and asking these questions, and many of these questions we've asked ourselves. I don't know, do you want me to cover the go shoots in particular, the rubies and East Humboldts in particular, or both, or?
Both, why don't you do everything, just try to address the questions that have been asked.
Okay. Like I said, it's something that we look at extremely hard, and anytime we identify potential habitats for a release, we look at not only the potential of the habitat, but the social factors, the political factors, and anything else which may come into a potential risk at that site. And we do a risk analysis, and we weigh both the risks and the potential benefits, the potential risks and the potential benefits of such releases. And I guess I'll start with the go shoots, and hopefully, if it's okay, I'm going to read the disclaimer notice that we put together for Mr. Roach and Roach Ranches that he reviewed, he's in full support of, and which New reviewed as well. Disclaimer notice by Endow and Roach Ranches. For the purposes of a release of Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep into the Go-Shoot Mountains, Elko County, Nevada, and a livestock class change of use proposed by Roach Ranches, Roach, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, Endow, has identified and reviewed foreseeable risks and benefits associated with such proposed actions. As such, the Department of Wildlife has conducted a preliminary risk assessment prior to that required by the Bureau of Land Management by the National Environmental Policy Act, which shall further analyze impacts associated with this proposal. Based on the review of the potential risks and benefits associated with the reintroduction of bighorn sheep into the Go-Shoot Mountain Range, Endow and Roach and their entities or representatives agree to the following. Roach and its permittees, employees, agents, or volunteers will exercise due diligence in abiding by the protective measures outlined in the proposal for conversion from sheep to sheep and cattle on the Leppy Hills, Utah, Nevada North, and Lead Hills grazing allotments, 2011. That's the title of their proposal. Roach will make every effort to maintain separation between the domestic sheep and bighorn sheep. Number 2, Endow releases, waives, discharges, and covenants to hold harmless Roach, its employees, agents, or volunteers, or for any and all loss of bighorn sheep due to disease transmission, interactions between the two species, or environmental events or factors in the Go-Shoot Mountains, given the above conditions are followed. Roach releases, waives, discharge, and covenants to hold harmless Endow, its employees, agents, or volunteers for any and all loss of domestic sheep due to disease transmission, interactions between the two species, or environmental events or factors in the Go-Shoot Mountains, given the above conditions are followed. Number 3, this disclaimer notice provides assurance to all interested parties that any reintroduction of bighorn sheep into the Go-Shoot Mountains located in Elko County, Nevada will not be used to influence or alter in any manner the existing use, levels, or distribution patterns of domestic cattle or sheep grazing in the same areas, especially in regards to input into the Bureau of Land Management grazing agreements that are used by that federal agency to administer grazing management on public lands located in the Go-Shoot Mountains. Endow reserves the right to cooperatively interact with the Bureau of Land Management and any other federal agency on any land use policy. So that's what we put together for the Go-Shoot Mountains, and again, Jeff and his consultants have reviewed it. To my knowledge, I don't know if we've received the signed copies. I just talked to Jeff the other day. So again, I guess I would like to stress on the go-shoots. This is something that I've been working on and the Department of Wildlife has been working on since 2007. And this is something that the permittee, Jeff Roach, came to us on and brought this idea forward to us. And there's a lot of specifics of his proposal, which he's provided to the BLM. And I'm just going to touch on a few highlights since you don't have that information available to you. Generally speaking, in the go chutes, they are divided from an allotment standpoint, east to west. On the west side is a cattle allotment currently held by Madeline Pickens. On the east side, there are 4 domestic sheep allotments held by several permittees, including Jeff Roach. Currently, for Jeff and on that east side, there are over 23,000 papered AUMs. I forget the exact number. In Mr. Roach's proposal, which he provided us, and which was his initial idea, he produced a proposal which identifies a significant reduction in AUMs from that 23,000 permitted to 7,500, or around 7,500 AUMs, and that a lot of that has to do with the class of livestock change. Also in his proposal, he included the opportunity and the willingness to reintroduce Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep into the go chutes. Within this proposal, there are several bighorn sheep protection measures outlined, several pages in fact, which are supported by WWiillddlliiffee guidelines. They include both temporal and spatial separation, and that's really why we felt this proposal may work, and why we were so willing to work with Jeff on this. Additionally, the geographic boundary of Highway 93, which runs on the east side of the go chute range, provides us a geographical boundary from a domestic sheep standpoint. And again, as I said, he's hoping to convert fully to cattle, but it'll probably be a stepwise approach. So that gives you some geographic separation. Additionally, there were buffers which were included as well, identified for his grazing practices that would provide a buffer between wild and domestic animals, domestic sheep. Currently, Jeff's season of use is, I believe, November 15th to April 15th. And I'm just going off of memory on this, but his proposed season of use change would be December 15th to March 30th, and that is one that we felt temporally separated the two species or classes in 2 critical times, and that would be the springtime when you had good green up, and domestic sheep and bighorn sheep are likely to move on the mountain and interact, and then also during the breeding season, which is one of the most critical. The other noteworthy item would be that Mr. Roach's sheep would have been bred before they came into Nevada and released on these allotments. So that gives you somewhat of a background on this proposal. Like I said, it's been something we've been working on for 5 years in cooperation with Mr. Roach and the BLM. With regards to the rubies and the East Humboldts, again, you guys have had many of the same questions we have had, and other researchers, professors, veterinarians, and biologists throughout the United States and beyond. The bottom line is that as our knowledge is progressing on these issues, there are many unanswered questions, and we feel that this proposal will further our knowledge excuse me, in answering some of these critical questions and knowing what types of successes we can have. I can tell you right now in the East Humboldts, we spent a significant amount of aerial survey time in the East Humboldts. In fact, we used a better, more powerful helicopter to get a better survey. We contracted it out. We identified 15 sheep in the East Humboldts this winter, 5 rams and 10 ewes. And at that time, no lambs. It was prior to lambing season. Since then, we observed 2 lambs being produced by the 10 ewes. To date, we don't know the status on those since they've gone back up onto their summer ranges with the snow and stuff. It's been really hard for us to follow those. So we don't know if they are currently recruited into the population, or if they will be there come this winter. For the rubies, again, significant amounts of aerial survey time. We documented 16 sheep, and more or less those sheep were scattered between 4 winter ranges. In the East Humboldt, they were on 1 primary winter range together. The rubies, the composition was 6 rams and 4 ewes, and since that time we've identified 3 lambs in that area, and again, not knowing the fate of those lambs to this point, and whether or not they've been recruited or will be recruited come this winter. So I guess to answer the question of, are we able to gather all of the sheep out of the East Humboldts and effectively remove that potential for interaction with the new sheep? I guess it's as good as it's going to get. They're concentrated on 1 winter range. They've had past winter ranges where we've surveyed. There were multiple winter ranges, and bottom line, we didn't see any sign or indirect or direct sign of those animals. So.
I guess I want to make a couple comments. First of all, from my understanding on the AUMs, I think the 23,000 probably represents sheep, and a sheep AUM is 5 sheep, whereas a cattle is a mother cow calf combination, if I understand, and so that's just some explanation there.
Yeah, the BLM is based on they're working on the conversion rate, and in fact, there's not total agreement on what that conversion rate is going to be. There's been statements by the BLM that say it's probably going to have to be higher. Roach and his consultants are working through a process which would be more based on monitoring and actual available forage in the go chutes to come to that conversion factor. So that's still in negotiations between Roach and the BLM.
And then, so I want to further comment that with regard to issues dealing with really what should be dealt with by our ranching rep, we've got 2 commissioners who are sportsmen that are asking these questions and making these comments when, and the way it should work is we should have our ranching rep here asking these questions, and unfortunately he is not. So I don't know if there's any other questions that he would have asked, but anyway, I just wanted to make that statement for the record. Any other commissioners with comment?